to Writer's Lunch today. I have to apologize in advance. I'm having some issues with my technology. My webcam on my computer does not seem to be working right now. So you're just going to have to look at this little picture of my face while I'm talking instead of my actual face. Fortunately, the screen sharing does work, so you can still see my presentation. But we appreciate you all being here at Writer's Lunch today. It's great to see everybody. Next week, we have our Ask an Editor hour. Um, so yeah, that's right. It's the next week is the fourth Thursday of the month, so it's Ask an Editor. So we're gonna have all or most of the TomeWorks editors are gonna be here in a panel, and we're gonna be answering some of your questions about attending conventions as a writer. So
Both
it's
as a presenter
yeah,
or workshop runner, if you are
yeah.
at that level. But if you're new, we'll also talk about how to make the most out of attending a convention.
Yeah. So, and it's, it's convention season, so it's a good time to, or we're coming into convention season, so it's a good time to like talk about that, because people are going to be going to these kind of events, starting really soon. But for this week, we're going to be
Oh,
talking about, oh, sorry, go ahead, Shannon.
Anna,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm going to bug you. One of the things that's like news, if you find us on Meetup, I haven't put this directly in the groups yet, but if you find us on Meetup, we are going to be moving off of that platform for a number of reasons. And so we are kind of moving all of our organization, at least right now, um, over onto Substack. Although if you found us on Eventbrite, we are still there and you can find everything there. But if you are a Meetup, I would suggest either following us on Eventbrite or following us on Substack, so that you can continue to receive notifications about these events, and that you can join these events and that you don't miss, educational opportunities. So I will be putting that information into the chat during Anna's presentation. And if you want to sit down and talk to me about why we would be moving off of something that we've been on since 2018, I will gladly tell you what Bending Spoons has done to the platform. But this is about Anna's presentation, so I will get off of my
Well,
soapbox and let
here's the
her
thing.
get started.
I know I'm not supposed to, but I'm going to look through it. I'm going to look
Thanks,
through it.
Shannon.
I ain't going to take no pictures, but I'm going to look through it. Yep. All right.
Okay, we're gonna put
Uh,
someone into the waiting room.
okay. All right. Well, thank you, Shannon. And again, thanks everyone for coming. It's good to see you all here. Um, Today, I'm going to go through um, some writing tips that we have talked about. Like a lot of these we have talked about on Writer's Lunch before, and maybe it's been a long time since we've talked about them, but there are things that I have noticed come up really often, but between me and the other people in TomeWorks and other writers that we talk to. Um, these are some tips for like improving your writing craft that come up really often, and maybe we don't always, talk about them in depth. So we're gonna do my top 10 definitive ranking of tips and tricks for improving your writing craft. Really quick, before we get into that, a little bit about me. If you don't know me, because I do think I see some new faces here. Um, but should be obvious. I'm an editor at TomeWorks. I'm a science fiction and fantasy author, primarily. I've been co-hosting Writer's Lunch since 2022, along with Shannon and Sean and Daphne and Ian. And I am also an experienced game master for tabletop role-playing games such as D&D. And that's relevant because of how I've structured my presentation, so we'll talk about that. But in addition to being a game master for tabletop role-playing games, I also like to paint minifigures, and so this is one that I've done recently, a minifigure that I've painted. So just a little fun fact, something that I do when I'm not writing or editing. But since I am a game master for tabletop role-playing games, what I have done is I have taken all of these top 10 skills that we're going to be talking about today, and I have made a little stat block for them. So I want to break down really quick how to kind of read these stat blocks. So as we go through, this will make sense, what we're looking at. So first, obviously, the name of the tip. This is what we're talking about, what we're going to be doing. That's pretty self-explanatory. I've put all of the top 10 tips into categories. The categories are, these are either editing tasks or writing tasks or like a creativity or learning task. And so that's kind of like where in the process of writing you are going to be kind of employing this specific skill that we're going to be talking about. Skill boost. This is just how much it boosts your writing skills overall. I think I've put it on a scale from 1 to 10. But the number scale is more for fun, but it's like my opinion of like if you employ this skill, how much will it kind of boost your overall writing? Each skill has 3 stats. And these stats are time, brains, and noob. Time is the additional time you're going to spend writing if you are employing this task. Brains are the additional brain power needed if you employ this tip. And noob is your likelihood of getting clocked as a newbie writer if this is something that you employ. So you'll see time and brains are usually going to be pluses. Noob is going to be a minus. And these are generally on a scale from 0 to 10, but there are some that exceed that scale. And then last is just our little short description of what we're talking about when we talk about this writing tip, writing trick. And that's kind of, as we go through each slide, that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on is what exactly do we mean when we talk about this? All right, so are y'all ready to get into it? I do want to remind you all, this is a totally correct and definitive ranking. No one will disagree with me. If you do disagree with me, you are free to fight me over it. But yeah. So kidding aside, let's get into the top 10 writing tips that I see kind of pop up the most often. Let's see. And I'm gonna keep an eye on the chat. So if you have like questions or whatever as I go through this, feel free to type in the chat or raise your hand. Okay, so number 10. Just because this is number 10, that doesn't mean it's not important. These are like the top 10. So there are a lot more writing tips that you'll hear floating around out there, but these are the top 10 ones. So they're all important. But I have to rank them somehow. So number 10 is triaging feedback. This is something that you're going to be doing in the editing phase. After you've gotten feedback from readers, like your first readers, these are going to be, if you have a critique group, it'll be your critique group. If you have like, trusted beta readers, when you get feedback back from them, one thing that we mention a lot is to triage your feedback. That means prioritizing which feedback to address. In general, what this, how this kind of works is if you're receiving feedback, and let's say all of your beta readers, you have like 4 beta readers. Let's say all of them tell you that, this one particular character, their arc doesn't seem fully realized or their goals are not super clear, and you need to do some more character development for a particular character. Then you have another element of your book, say like, a plot element, and your 4 beta readers are all saying different things about the specific plot element. Like one says they don't like it, one says they love it, one says it's, it's great, but it's not quite working right yet. And, one is like, oh, it's perfectly executed. So when you're going through this feedback, and you're trying to kind of decide what to do to edit your book, the things that you're going to want to prioritize addressing are the ones where all of the people giving you feedback are saying the same thing. Or like, if they're not saying exactly the same thing, they all have like pointed to the same element of your story as something that's not working. That is a piece of feedback that you're going to want to address first versus something where you're getting different feedback from several different people and you're not really sure, what to do because everyone's saying different things and, some of them are saying opposite things. In that case, that is something that's less important to address. Because, whenever you're writing, you can never please everyone 100% of the time, except hopefully yourself, because hopefully you're your own ideal reader. But your other readers, they're gonna argue about stuff, and that's true whether they're beta readers or whether your book is out in the world and they're people who have actually purchased a copy of your book to read. This is really important for like triaging feedback is really important for like addressing the things that actually need to, or like identifying the things that actually need to be addressed in revisions. Um, and not killing yourself over, not knowing what to do because you've gotten opposite feedback on the same thing from several different people. This will, obviously it will take some extra time, some extra brain power to kind of like go through all your feedback and figure out, which things are really truly important to address and which aren't. But it will make you look like a little bit less of a newbie writer if you do it. So triage feedback, that's number 10. Number 9, this one is be descriptive. This is a writing task, so this is something you're going to do while you're writing. It could also fall into editing, but it's mostly going to happen in like the writing section. And this is something that I've included on here because I've seen a lot of writing recently that is very lacking in descriptive elements. And so reading it, when you're reading it, you don't have a lot of the scene setting. You don't have a lot of maybe internal monologue, which we'll get to later, but mainly, here we're kind of focusing on like scene setting and action beats and stuff like that. And I've seen a lot of writing recently that is very lacking in this. And so a lot of scenes feel like just back and forth dialogue. And so it almost feels like reading a screenplay as you're reading through it. It doesn't really feel like reading a book. And this is something that Sean talked about last week when he was talking about TV brain. And in writing prose, in writing novels, fiction, being descriptive is so important to help the reader feel like they've been transported into the scene. You do have to be kind of careful because you don't want to be so overly descriptive that you like fall into the purple prose category. But you do want to give the reader a sense of like time and place and how the characters are interacting with the like physical elements in the scene. Like if two characters are talking and there's a desk between them, we need to see while they are talking how they are interacting with or around this object that is in between them in the room. How does it affect their conversation? Like if they're arguing, are they like trying to lunge at each other over the desk, or are they trying to keep that between them so they don't get too close to each other because they aren't supposed to be near each other for whatever reason. And so yeah, it's something that can really elevate your writing. And so I would encourage you, like, and as you're writing, to really try to visualize the scene in your head, if that's something that you can do, because I know there are a lot of people out there who have like aphantasia, have a hard time visualizing things, but really try to kind of imagine that scene in your head and include all those visual elements and like descriptive elements to kind of help kind of ground the reader in the scene. Because otherwise, it ends up just feeling like we're floating in an empty void and the characters are just like, talking heads in an empty room. So we need to have those descriptive elements surrounding the dialogue and things like that.
And I have a question for you.
Yes, yes.
I mean, you specifically say to take care not to be over descriptive or purple prose
Hmm.
writing. Do you have any specific guidelines that you would suggest to find a happy medium in your descriptiveness?
Yeah. That I think comes with practice. And it's going to be I think that we're kind of going to touch on that a little bit in some of the higher ranked tips, because I think that a lot of these skills, it does take practice to develop them, and to kind of get a sense of, the flow and the rhythm and, where your description or, whatever you're doing, where it starts to get too long. As you practice more, you start to get a feel for that. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in in some of our higher ranked tips, because I don't want to give away too much about my list, because no one, I haven't even shared this list with Shannon, so like she doesn't even know what's on here. Um, but yeah, no, that's a good question. That's a good question. But we are gonna talk about it a little bit later. All right, number eight. Number eight is establish goals. This is establishing your character's goals on the page. This is also a writing task. Um, and this is something also that I have seen in a lot of writing lately that is kind of lacking, or there's a lack of clarity surrounding what a character is trying to do. And, especially if you want to go into traditional publishing, if you want to get an agent and be published, by one of the big five, publishers, your goals, your character's goal, and what's at stake if they fail is one of the most important elements that needs to be clear both in your opening pages and in your query letter and like the rest of your query packet. Um, this is one of the most important things to attract an agent's attention. If this is missing, an agent is not going to want to look at your stuff. But it's also important, if you're doing indie publishing or self-publishing, because your character's goals, and what is at stake in the story if they fail, is one of like it's one of the most important story elements to actually like hook a reader. If the reader knows what your character is trying to do and what's going to happen if they don't succeed, then your reader, can root for them. If your reader can't root for your character's success or your character's failure, if you're, writing about, a villain or someone trying to do something bad, if your reader cannot root for them one way or another, then the reader is going to have a hard time getting invested in their story. Um, so definitely, like as you're writing, make sure that you know as the author, you know what your character's goals are, and what the stakes are, and that these come through on the page really strongly, so that readers know what's going on. Um, okay, someone asked in the chat if I have a reader who I don't want to reveal the full goals of. How do I apply point eight? Yeah, that's a good question. So there is some leeway to kind of like be mysterious. The thing that I run into a lot of times is authors who are trying to like preserve that aura of mystery about a character's goals to the point where it's confusing for the reader and you don't really know what the story's about or like what's going on in the story. Um, So I think I would assume, kind of based on your question, because you said for an example, we originally don't know what they're up to. We may think they are good, but eventually they're revealed to be a villain. I would expect you have more than one point of view in this story. Um, and if you do, then you have a little bit more leeway to be to be like to like obfuscate the goals of particular characters because if you have multiple POVs, then you have like your main protagonist and their goals can be made more clear to the reader while you have like paired with them a villain or a possible hero turned villain POV where the goals are kind of obscured. And so that can work really well as long as the reader can like latch on to something. And so like goals don't even have to be plot related necessarily. If you want to hide the plot related goal, give the character something else that they're striving for in conjunction with their plot related goal. Um, so oops, I am scrolling through. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. So there's a book that I'm reading right now where one of the characters, it's unclear, it's a multi-POV story. But for one of the characters, it's unclear how their story fits into the main plot. But they do have a very clear goal, which is they have set out to like avenge the death of a family member. And so everything they do in the story is pushing them forward toward that goal. And while that goal may not be related to the main overall plot, that is still something that as a reader will help me get invested in that character because I want to know, are they going to be able to avenge their family member's death or are they going to, get themselves killed in the process? So you can give characters like secondary goals that you don't have to hide. To give the reader a little bit of something to like to chew on and to root for and to latch onto. Um,
And
so I would,
Anna, if I might
yes,
add, if
yes.
this is an intrigue plot, then I would be very careful about what your point of view is for that character. If it is a first person point of view and they have a hidden motivation, that can be very tricky. But like you're saying, have them 100% focus on the secondary goal without giving too much information
Mhm.
about your like actual primary goal that's going to show up down the line.
Yeah.
That it's a tightrope act to do that.
Mhm.
But if you completely obfuscate it, then it's probably going to piss off some readers, which I think you're probably scared of doing.
Right. Right.
But focusing on the second goal or just adding a few breadcrumbs without going deep into, a thought cloud essentially about what's going to happen. Just like, when this is all said and done, dun 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 dun, right? But like you don't have to lay out the full plan. But if
Right.
you allude to it, that can help be another way to intrigue the reader without completely giving away, the full plot,
Yeah.
especially if it's supposed to be a reveal.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And like Shannon said, you do run the risk of like either confusing or pissing off readers by just, keeping everything tightly under wraps. Um but, figuring out how to do that in a satisfying way um, takes practice. But it can be done. But it's kind of a balancing act. Um, but all right, let's see. Moving on to number seven. Number seven is inhabit other minds. This is where we are getting into our characters' heads. This is a writing task, and I think so far this is the highest skill boost rating that I've given one of these tips. Um, and this is something that will really elevate your writing. Um, and it's also something that recently I have seen this missing in a lot of manuscripts where we don't have very much of an internal monologue at all. And so, the reader, even with the POV characters, the reader doesn't know what the character's thinking, doesn't know why they're reacting to things in the way that they do because we're getting no internal monologue whatsoever. Um, and that is going to be a confusing read for your reader. Um, and so when you're writing, especially, when you're writing from like a close POV, um, excuse me, um, you need to be kind of imagining what your character is thinking and putting some of that on the page. And so when someone asks them a question and they smile before responding, why are they smiling? We need to have some idea of like, why they're reacting to this question in the way that they do. Or like if they react poorly to, someone makes an offhand comment and, your character just snaps and like turns around and punches them in the face. Why are they doing that? We may not need to have that why directly in the moment, but once the tense moment is over, where the character has a moment to kind of reflect on what has just happened, that is where you can use the internal monologue to kind of reveal more of your character to the reader and show the reader, this is why they're like this. Um, and I think it goes back to if y'all were here for Sean's writer's lunch last week, which is why, last week when Sean was giving his writer's lunch on TV Brain, I said, "Oh yeah, it'll dovetail really well with mine next week," because like this is another thing. This and like description are two kind of like big things that I have seen missing from a lot of manuscripts that I've looked at lately. And I think, part of it is that uh, people are kind of thinking of writing a book as if they're writing a TV show, and it's not the same thing. In a book, in TV, if you're watching a TV show, you get you get less insight into what's going on in a character's head than if you're reading a book. In a book, you expect to have that insight of like, why is your character um, doing what they're doing? What is their motivation? What are they thinking about? These are things that you need to have in a book to. I'm sorry, my cat is trying to do gymnastics on my chair. Uh, but these are things that, in a book, you need to have them to help reveal the character and the plot and the reason for things to you. Whereas, like, if you're watching a TV show, you get a lot more body language and, facial expression through the acting. Um, and you can kind of infer why the character's doing things. But in a book, you can actually, show the reader what the character's thinking and give them the internal monologue. So being able to really get into the head of your character and like inhabit their mind while you're writing from their POV, and then putting like, at least a part of their thoughts onto the page, is going to really help the reader feel like they know your character.
So we have a question for clarification.
Yes.
If we take number 7 as a hard rule, won't we be always spoon feeding details to the readers?
Yeah. So yes and no. And like you don't want to it kind of goes along with the question before about, trying to be mysterious about the goals. But uh
So I know
you
your
don't have
cat's
to give.
bugging you. I'm gonna take over just a little bit. One of the things that we're kind of arguing against doing is having none of this on the page. And so um if you were able to join last time, you would kind of get a better understanding of this. But it's a situation where there's a lot of new authors, especially, who don't allow you to get any sort of interiority of the character. So the goal isn't to like drag the story down with interiority and over focus on, how the character is reviewing things around them, because of course that would suck. But the goal is to make sure there is at least some interiority and that it is not completely lacking. People who
Right.
don't read often write books where the interiority is 100% missing, or it's inconsistent, or we only get it, in, one scene out of 10. And so we don't want your writing to have a dearth of complexity, because you're writing something the way you imagined a TV show, or you're writing it only because you visualized it and haven't got a good mix of exterior detail and interior detail.
Right. I don't know if you all heard my cat just gallop off across the house. I don't know what she's doing, but she is uh making this difficult. But yeah, no, that's kind of what I was gonna say is like you don't have to give the reader everything, but there's a happy medium between everything and nothing. And what I've been seeing a lot of lately, and why this kind of tip keeps coming up, is that when you are seeing a lot of nothing, um, you need more than that. Um, and so, like we, as the reader, we need to know like what motivates your character. And we don't need to know it all up front right at the beginning, but we need to have like little hints throughout your book of like, maybe another character makes a joke about your POV character's mom, and your POV character lashes out. And we don't get the reason why necessarily right then, and we may not get the reason why they're so sensitive about those kinds of comments until much later in the book, but we get some hint in their internal monologue of like, yeah, I'm all, I don't like comments about my mother, like, or just some kind of little kind of breadcrumb that will lead us to, okay, there's something deeper here. And, the author, by giving us these little breadcrumbs, is establishing trust with the reader that, like, at some point we're going to figure out why. Versus if, your character is just reacting badly and we get no reason why. And then it's like, well, why is this person like this? Why are they such a dick? Like, and then the reader has nothing to hint that, there's something coming later, because there's no internal monologue to give them any kind of breadcrumb. So it's all about striking a happy medium between all and nothing. And I think that's kind of the main point. And that is something that we're going to talk about later. So stay tuned. Um, but all right, let's see. We're going to move on to
While you're getting to
number
the next screen, I do want
six.
to say thank you for
Yes.
bringing that up. We want to make sure that we're not giving you a sense of like being conscripted into a certain thing at like maximum power.
You say that, Shannon, but I am doing that. This
All
is
right,
this is
fine,
a
never mind.
conscriptive list. No. No, it's okay. But no, like I have learned in giving advice to authors that sometimes uh you have to be a little bit like um oh how do I want to say this? Sometimes being too wishy-washy is not helpful. And so you have to be like more definitive in how you give advice. And then as authors build the skills, then they can, break these rules a little bit more. But it's all about, having to build these skills from the ground up, which again, we're gonna talk about more later. Um, all right, so number six is incluing. This is an editing task. It's a pretty high skill boost. Takes a lot of brains, but if you can make this work, then it will be really good for your writing. So incluing is a word for indirect exposition. And this is how, especially if you are writing in a secondary world in fantasy or science fiction, um, uh, this is how you want to reveal your world to, or this is how you can use incluing to reveal your world to your readers without large blocks of exposition that are boring to read, which again is something that I see a lot of. And it's okay to have those large blocks of exposition in your early drafts, in your world building notes. The exposition is you explaining the world to yourself. So I do think that, really early in the world building and the drafting process, the large blocks of exposition are good and necessary. But when you start getting into your later drafts, and that's why this is an editing task, when you get into, the drafts that are actually going to go out into the world and be shared with other people, um, the large blocks of exposition, other readers are going to find those boring. So, incluing is how you can keep a lot of the detail that would come out in your exposition, but weaving it in with the narrative. So, you don't want to have like a whole paragraph explaining that, oh, this society, they do things in this particular way, they wear these particular clothes, the blah, 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 blah. And it's like a whole paragraph or a whole page, explaining kind of some of the details of this society. Instead, you move the plot forward and like sprinkle some of those little details in there. So you can have action happening and also be like describing what a character looks like or describing their clothing or showing those details in how they interact with other characters, versus just like kind of listing them off in a big paragraph that explains how everything works. Um, and in my own writing, in my early drafts, when I go back and I am revising drafts, this is one of the first things that I look for is like big kind of blocks of exposition, and I'll just like cross out whole paragraphs. And if I find details in those paragraphs that are necessary for the reader to understand the story, then I find a way to weave those in with the actual action that's happening. So I'm not interrupting the scene or the plot to like have a block explaining something that's in that scene. So and I wrote a blog post about this that's up on our website that has some like concrete examples of how to use including. So if you are not really sure, how to do this, definitely go check out my blog post. I don't know if Shannon can dig up a link for me. I should have done that before we
Yep,
started.
no, I'll do it right now. And I'll
Okay,
add it
thanks,
to the show
Shannon.
notes on YouTube and on Substack when we put
Cool.
the edited version of this out.
Awesome. Thank you, Shannon. But yeah, the blog post has some actual like concrete examples of like what I mean when I say weave your world building in with the plot. So, but definitely this is a very important skill for I would say every writer, but especially science fiction and fantasy authors, who are working in a secondary world where things are might be really different from our world. So this is a really important skill to learn and to master. So definitely, practice this as you are, trying to kind of level up your writing. Um, all right, moving on. Number five, we're getting into the final ones, the top five. So number five, and let me check the chat to see if we have any questions. I see some comments. Okay, Shannon put my blog in there. Thank you, Shannon. Um, all right. So number five, consider point of view. This is a writing task, so this is something you're going to be doing. You wanna start doing this while you're drafting. So it's really important when you're writing from a close POV to consider what your POV character would notice either, in a scene or about another character. And, I kind of wish I had put, I have a picture that I like to trot out for when I'm talking about POV. That's a screenshot from one of my favorite video games. But it's where the character is trying to read a book that's on a shelf that's too high. And so because the character's short, and so when you try to interact with this book, the dialogue that comes up is this is too high to read. And to read the book, you have to actually climb up onto a higher shelf. And then once you get up above it where you can see it, you can read it. But so that is a really good example of considering POV. And how you can consider POV more in your writing, because your character, whose POV you're writing from, is not going to notice every single thing about a person, is not going to notice every single thing about the room. Um, and so, when you have your POV character, kind of come into a scene, consider the kinds of things that are important to that character and the kinds of things that they would notice first. And then maybe, as you go further through the scene, especially if, maybe they're doing some sort of investigation, they're looking closely at things, then they can notice more, but they're not going to notice everything all at once. And there are going to be like, things that your character is drawn to, that they'll notice first, and then things they have to look for if they want to see it. Um, so just really spend some time thinking about um, what kind of person your character is, and like kind of some of the physical attributes that they have, and how that will affect the kinds of things that they notice, both about, rooms that they're in, or environments that they're in, and the people that they're talking to. Um, and keeping this in mind while you're writing, is really gonna help, level up your writing quite a bit, because readers will notice, you know, if uh, uh, if your POV character is noticing things that, they may not be able to see. One specific thing that I've seen recently is a POV character noting the color of their own eyes. They cannot see their own eyes. Unless they're looking in a mirror, and that's a whole other, can of worms, when we're doing fiction. But like, a POV character, like I'm not sitting around my house during the day thinking about how my eyes are green. And so, like, no one is going to be thinking in their internal monologue that, like, yes, my piercing green eyes see through all of the bullshit that people are throwing toward me. Like, that's not like, yeah, people don't think that way. So just think about, what your character would and can notice about a particular scene or about other characters, and consider that when you're writing their internal monologue and building their POV.
Can I add another? This
Yes.
is like one of the higher level skills when it comes to POV. Having a strong POV and also being in the interiority of that character allows you to show a lot of change in the character's arc, especially when you're talking about your protagonist, your primary character for a scene. As they relate to other people, as they relate to the situation they're in, the way they interpret it will change as they have character growth, or if we're talking about an anti-hero, decrepitude of their character. So, the motivations they ascribe to acts, how they treat other people based upon the characteristics they interpret of them, especially if there's somebody who has a prejudice or it's a society that treats certain types of characters differently, all that kind of thing. The interiority in that POV help you as an author show who that character is,
Hmm.
and how that character changes through the story.
Yeah.
We do
Now
have a
there's
question
a
from Carly.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
I was just looking at that. So, yeah, so question in the chat, tips for making third person POV feel more intimate. Yeah, this is something that I've actually talked about before, on Writer's Lunch. It was a long time ago, and maybe I should bring that back out. I also have a blog on POV. On our website. I have a blog post about POV that kind of talks about this a little bit, because POV is kind of two parallel spectrums. And so you have like the first, second, and third person POVs, and then you have the close versus far POV. And a third person POV can still be a close POV where you are really getting into that character's head, and you have their internal monologue is like really strong. Their the things that you have down like really well, the things that they would notice about a scene, because of what kind of person they are, and like all of that can still be really strong in the narrative, even in a third person POV. So it's really about that internal monologue, and making sure that that comes through really strongly even in a third person POV, and that will make that third person POV feel more intimate. If you're getting a lot of those like internal thoughts, a lot of that internal monologue. So and if that's not something that you want, you can ease up on the internal monologue a little bit, and get a little bit less, and that's kind of a farther, more zoomed out third person POV than a really close one. And yeah, thanks Shannon for for pulling up my blog post again. But the blog post, we'll go into that in a little bit more depth, because I don't have time to get super into it today. But yeah, definitely check that out, and maybe I'll bring the POV talk back for another writer's lunch in the future, because I do think it's important, because I do think like a lot of times, people aren't really sure how to use POV, especially if they're doing, third person versus first person, and they're not really sure how close they can get or how far away they need to be. So, yeah, that's definitely something. Definitely check out the blog post about that, and maybe we'll talk about it on a future writer's lunch as well. But yeah, okay, let's see. Someone pointed out, I've seen too many first-person POV characters who seem to notice or remember way too much, and it breaks the immersion. Yeah, and that's a thing. So that's something that people have. People kind of rag on first-person POVs for being annoying, because I think they do fall into that trap of getting too much, and trying to share too much information, and things that character maybe wouldn't notice or wouldn't be able to notice. And yeah, yeah, you do have to consider like the things that your characters can or would notice, and not really go overboard in terms of that. All right, moving on. And I think we're going to go over time, so because I have 4 left. So number 4, consider balance. And this is high on the list because, if you've been kind of listening, the idea of balance has come up several times, as part of this discussion already. So, and again, this is an editing task. This is something that you're going to be looking at more closely, when you are in your revisions phase. But when you are writing, everything is about balance. You want all the elements of your prose, your story, like you want your dialogue, your narrative, the action, world building, the inner monologue. You want all of this to be kind of in balance with each other. And some of the like comments that people have had, or the questions that people have asked are, well, if we do this, then won't we be giving the reader too much? Or, first person POVs get annoying because they have included way too much information. And you're right. And what you are noticing and what you're kind of thinking about is a failure of balance. And so you, as the author, have to work out the kind of optimum balance between, what you share about the character's inner monologue and how much they speak to other people in dialogue, or how much they reveal in dialogue versus how much they reveal in the internal narrative. How much action and like tension you have versus how many kind of soft moments do you have to help kind of reveal more of your character. how much world building do you include versus how much do you leave it to the reader to infer? And this is a skill that you really have to work at. This is not easy. And like, none of these things happen overnight. Writing and writing well is a skill, just like anything else that you learn how to do. And so you can't just sit down and think about all these things that I've given you and write a perfect book. When you've never done it before. This it all takes like practicing and building out the skills and really kind of keeping all of this in mind as you put in the hours, as you put in the work. Um, so yeah. But balance is very important. And I think this one is the highest negative noob score that I've given so far. And if you have all your elements in balance, you're really going to look like a professional author. And readers will notice that. So definitely, keep this in mind, especially as you go into revisions and things like that. Keep that balance of all your elements in mind. All right, next, number 3, read aloud. This is reading your own work aloud. Generally, the kind of flow of drafting and revisions that we recommend and that a lot of other authors and editors will recommend as well is once you finish drafting your book, you have your completed manuscript, set it aside for a while, let it rest, let it kind of percolate through your brain, work on other things, and then come back to it after a few weeks to a few months. Come back to it later to do revisions. At this point, I like to recommend you read it aloud. What I personally do is I will print it off. I'll have it printed. I'll have the manuscript printed, and then I will take a red pen and I'll sit down and I'll read the book aloud to myself and I'll mark it up as I'm reading it aloud. But you don't have to print it to do this. You can read it aloud on your computer screen. But just reading it verbally will kind of make you stop and think about each of the words more than if you're reading it silently to yourself where it's easier to skim. If you have to actually verbalize all of the words, your brain has to actually process all of the words. And so it can really help you find mistakes. It can really help you find like awkward phrasing. It can help you find places where you've repeated information. It is really helpful to kind of help you work out like whether your rhythm of your sentences or your paragraphs, whether it feels natural to read. And so highly, highly, highly recommend reading your work aloud to yourself before you really get into the nitty-gritty of revisions, because it will help you find stuff you didn't even know was there. And like you could have read your manuscript, 3 or 4 times silently on a computer screen and not find things that you will find if you read it aloud. So if this isn't something that you already do, I highly recommend it. Someone asked thoughts on using apps like Speechify to hear it back once you've read it back yourself. I don't use them, but I know other authors who do find that helpful, and just being able to like hear it. I prefer to like read it myself, but I do know other authors who find like or like Microsoft Word has like text to voice or something where it can read back to you. And I know other authors who use that and do find it helpful. So that's another way to kind of do this reading aloud thing. I find like
I have 2 things to say about using the apps or the,
okay.
text to speech kind of things.
Okay.
I think that they are a great way if you do not want to engage yet. You have a task where you're like, I'm gonna go through, I'm gonna edit this. It's a great way to passively start your process.
Mhm.
So if you're just not in the mood, but you carve the space out to work on your book, Being able to make your cup of coffee while you listen to somebody else read your book gets your brain to engage with it slowly and more comfortably. And then you can move into that process. So I think that's a really good way to do it.
Yeah.
I will say though, if you are very intentional about your characters and if they have very specific speech patterns, or if you are trying to make them very distinguished from each other, you're going to get a lot more of the mistakes you made by like if you accidentally swapped, choice words for a character if you're the one reading it because you know what the cadence is supposed to be, whereas the automated voices do not. So if you have a large cast of characters and they're all supposed to be distinct, if you're the one reading it and you're like, uh-oh, character A is the one who says son of a bitch when they're upset, but over here I've got character B saying it. You're going to catch that better if you're the one reading.
Yeah. Yeah, I personally find that like reading it myself engages my brain more fully than listening to it. Um, so that's why I much prefer to like read it aloud to myself. But, like Shannon said, it can be helpful and I do know other authors who find it helpful to listen. All right, getting into our top two. Number two, read. As distinguished from reading aloud, this is reading. This is reading other people's work. Okay. And this has come up before, at least once. It is so important as an author to read other people's work, especially read in your genre to build familiarity with genre conventions and tropes, storytelling styles, etc. Also read outside your genre to see what other genres are doing, or read a scientific book to build some knowledge base. Like just read. Please read. Um, a writer has to be a reader. You cannot, and I am so serious about this. You cannot be a writer if you are not a reader. And I know, we try to be gentle with our tips. I am not going to be gentle with this one. You have to read if you want to write. You must. Absolute must. If you don't like reading, why do you want to write? Okay? Because I have heard from people who want to be writers who are like, well, I just don't like reading, but I want to write a story. Why do you want to write if you don't like reading? What is the point? Go do something else with your time. Because, if you don't like to read, um, then your writing is not going to be good. That's all it is.
All it is.
And someone is unmuted and now I'm echoing. Let me see. Okay. And there are lots of different ways to read. If you cannot afford to buy books, go to a library. There are plenty of libraries. If you have a hard time reading printed words, audiobooks are a thing. Pick up an audiobook. That's still reading. If you prefer books that you read to have pictures, pick up a graphic novel. There are so many really good graphic novels written for adults that you can read. Just please read. If you want to write, please read.
I've got a gentler way to say this. Creativity is something that's innate in human beings, and we applaud all creativity. You will have a much less frustrating time in your creative endeavor if you choose a creative endeavor that you already appreciate, that you're experienced in, that you have a love for, that you have an intrinsic understanding of what works and what doesn't work. So if you are not a big reader, but you still have a story in you, I would definitely suggest, certainly writing stuff down and planning, but debate whether using a literary form is the best way to get your creativity out there.
Read. Shannon is much gentler than me. I am not gonna be gentle with this one. Read. Figure out how to like it. Again, if you don't like reading printed books, read an audiobook. Listen to it. And you have so much time in your day, especially if you commute to work, read during your commute. Listen to an audiobook during your commute. My husband reads more books per year than I do now because he has an hour-long commute every day and he started listening to audiobooks on his commute. So just please read. Um, build familiarity with your genre, with the tropes. This will help you more than almost any other thing on this list, except for number one. This will help you figure out how to tell stories in your genre. And figure out how to break the rules of your genre in a way that's going to be satisfying to readers. Um, but yeah, read. Um, Before I move on to number one, does anyone want to try to guess what my number one tip is? I'm gonna get on my soapbox about number one also. That's why these are my top two, because I can soapbox about them.
I mean, I'm gonna guess it's get feedback.
Okay, that's a good guess. Does anyone else have guesses? There's something in the chat. Let's see.
Yeah,
Right along.
Edgar says write a lot.
Yeah, you got it, man. You got it. Number one is practice. Practice writing, please. Work on more than just one project. Practice. And, novels are daunting, okay? A novel, 50,000 words or more, that takes a lot of time. And so it can be hard to think about, well, how can I practice my writing if I'm working on this novel and like it takes me forever and like, how am I supposed to practice? Write short stories. Write short stories. Try to write a story in less than 5,000 words. A full, complete story in less than 5,000 words. I promise you, this, aside from reading, this is the best way. You have to do both. You have to do both. But practicing your writing skills, if you're already doing the reading, practicing is what's really gonna get you from okay to amazing. All right, practice. And one of the things, like when I was first, wanting to write and wanting to be an author, I think, one of the best like pieces of advice that I found on the internet was this: write short stories. And I have kind of like expanded it into a little bit of a challenge. Because when I first started writing short stories, I was having a hard time writing a complete story in less than 10,000 words. So then I started challenging myself to try to write a complete story in less than 5,000 words. And then once I got okay with that, I started challenging myself to try to write a complete story in less than 3,000 words. And if you can figure out the the right words to put together to write a satisfying story that is that short, you can expand that out to a novel that is really satisfying and packed full of information and doesn't have all of the bloat, the purple prose, the long blocks of exposition. If you can figure out how to do a complete story in less than 3,000 or in 3,000 words or less, then you can expand those skills to write a novel that is going to be gripping for your audience from beginning to end. If you can do that, you can do the novel. If you can do the short story, you can do the novel. But absolutely practice. And you don't necessarily have to write short stories. That's the number one thing that I would recommend. But, any writing is writing. You can world build for other projects. You can, write a blog post. You can make a PowerPoint like this. Make a little mini workshop for even if it's just for yourself. Write a journal entry like write. And the practice is what's really going to get you there. We see KB, thank you for appreciating my over 9,000 reference. Sarah recommends the monthly short story challenge at Deadlines for Writers. I've seen that one pop up a few times. I've never participated in it myself, but I have seen it kind of cross my feed a few times. And yeah, if it's free, absolutely participate in the free challenges for sure.
One of the
Um,
things that I love about that kind of thing, the short story
yeah.
contest, is that the deadlines are something that makes somebody who has a hard time crossing, the process of like, I'm
Hmm.
done and I'm sharing it with the world.
Yeah,
And that's a very scary precipice, especially for people who have never
true.
done it before. So having that deadline and it being a kind of competition or a challenge where you go from you're just writing and showing it to yourself or to a small group and kind of letting it exist independent of you as an author.
Hmm.
I think it's an important skill actually to build up.
Yeah.
And so that's great. Thank you, Sarah, for including challenges and contests. The one thing to be careful of, and I'm not saying this is what's happening with deadlines for writers, is that if you're sending something out, you want to make sure that you maintain your rights to the piece and
Hmm.
also be aware that if you are technically publishing something, you cannot give away first publishing rights.
Yeah.
So there, there's some wiggle there over the value in return once you are pretty established in your capacity to send things out to the world. But if you are just starting out and you're just trying to get yourself into the groove of writing, this is great.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, all
And
right.
Sarah says that this specific one is a workshop, not publishing, so you retain all rights. So that's
Oh, even
awesome. So
better.
deadlines for
Yeah.
writers.
Yeah, even better. Great. So that is my top 10 list. I know I kind of took the kid gloves off a little bit, especially on on the last two. But like I'm telling y'all, if you want to be a writer, if this is something that you really want to pursue, read, practice. Those are the top two things that you can do to level up your writing skill. If you do nothing else on my list, do those two things. And those two things will, like, you will start incorporating everything else just by accident if you read and if you practice. I promise. Um, all right, we are past 2 o'clock. Thank you everyone for sticking with me. I do have some honorable mentions because I know Shannon guessed my number one was going to be receiving feedback. That is on my honorable mention. It's the first one on my honorable mention list. It did not quite make it into the top 10, but it is also important to help you like identify things that aren't working. You do have to be careful if you're recruiting other people to read your work, who you choose as readers. You need to choose people that you trust and people who, at the very least, are regular readers of your genre. If you're just choosing like, your mom who hasn't read a book since she was in high school, or even like, you're a fantasy reader and you are choosing your mom who only reads historical fiction, um, that's she's not going to give you the kind of feedback that's really going to help you level up in your genre versus if you choose someone who does read fantasy. So be selective when you're choosing people to be the first readers of your work. But it is important to have those other eyes to kind of help you see things. Second honorable mention: stop as you know bobbing. This is something that I see a lot. Um, just stop explaining. And this is actually something that is mentioned in my blog on incluing that Shannon kindly put in the chat. And this is, I see a lot of writers who are trying to explain their world building or the lore to their readers, where, especially like in dialogue, where one character will turn to another and say, "Hey, did you know the sun rises in the east?" And the other character says, "No, I've lived in this world for 30 years and I didn't know the sun rose in the east. What an interesting piece of information." Stop doing that. Please. It's killing me. But I see it. I see it a lot. And it's especially in the case of where you have two characters who should both know this piece of information, but they're explaining it to each other for the benefit of the reader. And that is just, it's so hard to read. It's so hard to read. It's so cringy. I don't know if anyone has read Fourth Wing. I read Fourth Wing. They do a lot of this in the very beginning of Fourth Wing, and I almost did not make it through the book because of that. And I did not go back for the second one because of that. So just please, just get your world building on the page in a more engaging way. Use incluing instead of this. Next, sandboxing. When you delete stuff, save it. If you're deleting a scene, a character, world building element, whatever, save it. Make a sandbox of like all of your scrapped ideas so you can play around in it later when you want something new to work on. And I think the last honorable mention is get weird. Get weird. Especially in this era that we're moving into of AI that writes this like average, uninspired slop. Let your own writing get weird. Don't be afraid to get carried away with your creativity. Write the thing that feels bonkers, and just see how your first readers respond to it, and see how it turns out. Write the bonkers thing. Do it. Just don't be afraid to get weird, because if we're afraid to get weird, and then AI is writing average uninspired stuff, and we can't get weird with it, then what do we have? We have nothing interesting. So that's it. That's all I got. Thank you for bearing with me and letting me soapbox on some of my top tips. I know, a lot of times, most of the time, we try to be like really gentle when we're giving advice and not so prescriptive, but I wanted to kind of take a little bit of a different tack for this one, especially for a few of my little top tips. Because I think that they're just so important to helping you build your skills as a writer. And I just like, I cannot emphasize enough how important some of these things are to do if you want to be an author. So I hope that you found something interesting in here. If you need more clarification on some of the things I've talked about, please check out my blog post that Shannon has put in the chat. And yeah, we'll be back next week with our Ask an Editor Hour, and we're going to be talking about attending writing conventions. So thanks everyone for being here. We hope to see you next time.